Okay, here we go. Pixar's Amazing Cars. God, even the title alone is like 3 words long. I gotta admit, I do actually like the original Cars movie. You know, I'll say it. It's a good movie. Is it a top 10 Pixar movie? Absolutely not. Does this universe make sense when you really think about it? Absolutely not. However, like many of us out there, I can't deny that this movie was an absolute banger as a kid, and it's clearly had its longevity because of some sort of quality somewhere. And so recently, I did a rewatch for this video, and I gotta admit, it's not terrible. It's a genuinely solid film. And though it may not be perfect, I think there's still so much to appreciate, and considering this is Pixar at some of their prime time, and looking at all the rival movies that are out there, it would be valid to say this is an amazing movie, even if it's not quite my exact personal taste. The thing with this initial stretch of Pixar movies is that they had a general policy of making movies that may be suitable for kids, but are otherwise made for everyone. And that is why Pixar movies are universal entertainment. Everyone can enjoy them. And I think Cars has that kind of approach in the whole theme of winning isn't everything and appreciating the small things. However, I can also see why the Talking Cars movie translates as a lot more young-leaning than maybe the rest on its surface. They've basically just done a high-budget version of a preschool cartoon premise. However, on revisiting that original 2006 movie, yes, it'll be 20 years old fairly soon, how does it actually fare? Well, starting with the opening scene, we couldn't really get off to much of a stronger start. Ignore the fact that somehow a truck knocks on the door. This scene is absolutely phenomenally executed. The initial inner monologue cutting between pitch black and the smash cuts of the race sets the tone perfectly. It's a shame there was absolutely no way of going into this movie without knowing that this is a world of anthropomorphic cars, as otherwise that initial reveal of him coming out the truck would have been a right laugh. Even knowing the full context, I still like that touch. Once he's out the truck, Pixar absolutely dive in with yes, they're all cars, with crowd shots that look like they took absolute months to pull off. I mean, the detail in this opening scene just looks so expensive. As for the race itself, you can't beat such well-executed action combined with that Sheryl Crow song. Real gun. The adrenaline my 10-year-old self got from this scene was off the scales. This was a real showcase of how far Pixar had come in animation. Even the reflective surfaces on the cars are something to appreciate. The lights, the smoke on the track, they pulled all of this off a solid 13 years before the photorealistic cat in Toy Story 4. The sound choices in this scene are so visceral as well. The roaring engine of a car is often characterized as something that's alive, so you've got to deliver on that when living cars are literally the premise of your movie. I gotta say it. Even just Lightning's engine alone gives him a physicality and weight just through the use of sound. And it's the kind of filmmaking I've not really paid attention to in the Cars movies before this point. Whilst this is also a thinly disguised exposition dump, I do think the commentaries setting up the 3 main races also worked in pretty seamlessly. This all just comes across as an organic part of the world building which sets up the core rivalry whilst not feeling forced. The fact that they're voiced by actual racing commentators also just adds that extra layer of authenticity. I wish I knew sports and could be more uproarious about each casting choice. But if you want to get your audience to buy into the commentary of a fictional race, yeah, get a couple of guys who have professionally done it a million times over. This commentary also doesn't give us everything. The fact that Lightning is set up as the rookie gives that initial investment of wanting to root for him before we find out that he may not actually be the nicest guy in the world. Come on now. I like that they generally keep that personality trait behind the curtain for the opening race. With both the silly slow motion shot of him winking and refusing to replace his tires, all we really get is that he's a bit of a show-off and has a sometimes ill-judged sense of determination. However, someone we do find out a piece of work from the get-go is Chick. In a movie where the protagonist is also full of himself, you need the villain of the piece to double down on that. It's interesting because you can't really call him the story's main antagonist either. He really has nothing to do with the story other than the beginning and end of it. However, as the unlikable rival to Lightning, he fits the bill perfectly. Also, I didn't realize until recently he was voiced by Michael Keaton, a guy who's done a surprising amount with living cars for Disney, being in Herbie Fully Loaded the previous year. Remember that movie? Now that's nostalgic.
You need tires, you idiot!
Of course, the tire skipping incident comes back to haunt McQueen right as he nears the finish line. This movie is only minutes in at this point, yet it still manages to create genuine tension, albeit with a bit of a silly crescendo with him jumping along. To be fair, that's one argument in favor of something you couldn't have done in a human world setting. Throughout this whole opening race, they do the legwork to get you invested in the action, which is hard to do in a fictionalized game of sport. I've said before about how I kind of have a hard time getting invested in fiction sports scenes, as the whole appeal of sport is the spontaneity of the outcome, you know, the realness. In animation, even more so, you know. However, here, I can fully buy into it. With both the main races in this movie, the results are genuinely different to where most audiences probably thought they were going on the first watch. I know how I said the final sprint is otherwise a little bit silly, but I do find the referees reviewing the footage with the tongue to be pretty funny. Meanwhile, following the race, we get the first full taste of Lightning being a bit of an a-hole.
How will I ever find anyone else who knows how to fill me up with gas?
Which is quite a bold move for the lead of your movie. I mean, this is the studio who had to rework the original Toy Story because Woody was too unlikable. To have such a brashly arrogant character as the protagonist can be a huge turn-off, but I think they handle it well in this case. This is why I bring up the opening race so much, where they don't drop these characteristics on you immediately. You're almost tricked to partially buy into the character before his toxic traits are introduced. And sorry if that just sounds like your relationship history. And sticking to the topic of morally questionable guys, this adult joke turns up.
We're like your biggest fans! Ka-chow!
Yep, it's a flashing joke. As we say, it's made for everybody. Lest we forget who directed this. We also have Lightning's pit stop crew walk out on him, also showing he's not the biggest team player in the world either. And at this point, I'd definitely like to shout out Owen Wilson's voice performance for somehow not making him completely unlikable at this point. You definitely need someone to bring an air of charm when the main character's otherwise just an arrogant show-off who has to go on a journey to learn to be a nice person, you know? Kinda reminds me of Bill Murray's character in Groundhog Day, but, you know, with cars. We also then get a full introduction to the King. Cue daydream sequence that seemed to spawn off a whole range of toys all by itself. Yes, Lightning doesn't really listen and just thinks about the gas station from Toy Story sponsoring him, which does raise the question of whether dinosaurs are a thing in this universe. I mean, I guess they're kind of eating liquid dinosaur, and dinosaurs do exist in the wider Pixar world, technically. What we do know is that Lightning thinks he's a one-man show and doesn't need anyone's input to get where he wants to be. Wow, this guy sure has a lot to learn. I wonder if there's a whole movie about that. Not to worry, this guy gets his first slice of humble pie when he prematurely pops out on stage, presuming he's won. But by the touch of a tongue, it's a three-way tie. So they've got a rematch elsewhere. Seems simple enough. What could possibly go wrong? Before Lightning can head off, Mac's on hand to make sure he fills his sponsorship agreement.
You gotta make your personal appearance.
That being an ointment for rusty cars, which, judging by the clientele, doesn't seem to work so well. It's a nice additional note to establish Lightning's detachment from everyone, whilst also setting up a rusty car prejudice that'll pay off when...
Morning, Sleeping Beauty!
Oh, dear God, help us all. Before we get there, though, we first have one of the all-time great road trip needle drops. Yes, I'm talking about Life is a Highway.
Life is a highway.
Honestly, this soundtrack has some absolute winners. And I think it's interesting because obviously this is in its own regard a pop culture song choice, but it is also a cover made expressly for this movie and also is pretty on point for what's actually going on rather than just shoving in a song randomly because here's the high montage moment or something. Plus, I mean, with the whole premise of the movie, yeah, all of life
Is a highway.
in this world. Not to mention, it's yet more of Pixar showcasing we could literally just animate the real world now. I mean, the landscapes in this sequence are just insane, and they're certainly not the last we'll see. They pop up for just a matter of seconds, yet you can still tell that they went all in on them. That's just Pixar, man. Anyway, this sequence ends with Lightning's call with his agent, who, in the UK at least, is indeed voiced by Jeremy Clarkson.
And it is such an honor to be your agent.
Mr. British Cars man himself, turned farmer, turned tax avoider. I think it's a really interesting example of how Cars puts in so many celebrity voice casts, but more as cameos in a way to not, you know, completely Chris Prattify a movie. And this is back in 2006. It's a really interesting display of casting choices, which admittedly, I never even ever noticed, but hey, that's just me. It's still very, very cool that they did this. It's easy to overlook this bit, but it's also the only insight we get into Lightning's loneliness until much later on. As Harv tells him to invite his friends, it becomes quite apparent from what he doesn't say that he doesn't have any.
Mr. Propper, there's so many friends you can't can't even narrow it down.
Considering how unlikable he is in the previous scene, this one crack in the armor adds a whole other layer to the character. We need at least a hint of him unfulfilled so that certain decisions he makes later on don't just come out of nowhere. The clues are all planted here, and I like that this isn't even overemphasized. You know, it doesn't need to be. I don't need a Hamlet self-pitying monologue from Lightning McQueen, as entertaining as that would probably sound. On to Mac getting sleepy and Lightning proceeding to overwork his one remaining employee. Always stop when you're getting tired on the road, people. Not only could you die in a horrific crash, but your passenger could fall into the road in their sleep before narrowly missing a train and then panic destroying the road of a small nearby town, which they'll then have to repair through a community service sentence. Hate it when that happens, but that's how it unfolds here. But first, we have the neon cars taunting Sleepy Mac. These characters remind me of the sort of people I get anxiety walking past in the street. What do you know, I'm triggered by glow-in-the-dark cars. Through shenanigans, Lightning ends up in the road and the chaos ensues. This scene pulling off that sense of panic very well as well. As Lightning looks on at the hordes of identical trucks, it takes you right back to losing your parents in a busy setting. Of course, instead of staying on the main road, Lightning instead takes a turn towards the rest of the movie. They spent a lot of time animating this town, you can't just skip it.
He's shooting at me! Why is he shooting at me?
Gotta love America. From the loud action, we cut to some contrasting establishing shots that perfectly set up the sleepy town of Radiator Springs. Again, the sound editing choices in this are absolutely stellar. And in 2 short gags, we quickly get a picture of what life's been like in this town. Between Guido repeatedly correcting the tire every time the wind blows it and Sergeant Fillmore looking at the broken traffic light.
Every third blink is slower.
The 60s weren't good to you, were they?
Gotta love this movie's vision of peace. And the best gags are the ones that tell the story at the same time, and everything we need to know about the personality of this town is on show here. The incoming destruction wouldn't have its intended worlds collide effect if we weren't first quickly caught up to speed with the peace or perhaps dullness that was being disrupted. After all, the whole town noticed and is in the courtroom the next day. They also don't go half measures on the destruction. I love how unnecessarily elaborate it is. I can only imagine the storyboard stage going like, so the barbed wire fence now wraps around him and then gets stuck on a statue and then pulls out of its plinth and then drags it along the road before launching it off a trailer and then it fires into a telephone wire. You know, sounds plausible enough. We love organized scripted chaos. And then we quickly cut to the empty trailer for a dash of toilet humor.
What? Did I forget to wipe my mud flaps?
Before being introduced to the MVP of the Cars universe.
Morning, Sleeping Beauty!
Now, for those expecting me to go all in on a meta takedown, just a thesis character assassination, I'm not quite going to today. I'm not a huge fan of the character, but in this movie at least, he serves his comedy sidekick role solidly enough. He has some solid comedy beats peppered in there, but on the flip side, there is also
You're in love with Miss Sally.
where the character's a tad piercing, which Cars 2 saw as an invitation to double down on.
Do not eat the free pistachio ice cream.
Dark times indeed. And coming out of that second movie, he kind of became Pixar's Jar Jar Binks in many ways. There's a reason his role somewhat reduced in the third one, though the damage was already done by that point. And I appreciate it's hard to go back to the first one without the stench of how overexposed the character was after this point. But honestly, here he's fine. Not an all-time classic character by any stretch, but harmless. As for the rest of the town, as we get into the court scene, I really like the ensemble we have here. In researching for this movie, the animators were actually sent on a Route 66 road trip where they went to a small town that inspired Radiator Springs. Whether it was an Italian barber, an old trinket shop, a tattoo parlor, or a 50s style diner, it was all there, and you can see that reflected in the characters. The bulk of this movie relies on the audience buying into this small community, and the reason it works is a sense of truth behind it. Who knows, maybe even Mater was based on someone, other than the very iconic voice of the voice actor Larry the Cable Guy.
Shoot, I'll do it, Sheriff.
We get the introduction of Doc Hudson, which I believe was the final major film role for legendary actor Paul Newman, and though he probably wasn't looking for the Talking Cars movie to be his final performance, it's definitely a strong role to go out on. I mean, he's great in this, and it's very fitting for a bona fide classic Hollywood star to voice a character that, as we learn, is meant to have a similar kind of status. In fact, fun bit of trivia here, Doc Hudson's big 1954 crash is the same year as Paul Newman's first credited on-screen role. He's perhaps the most important character in telling this movie's story, so it's good that they went all in on the casting here. Even the character design sits with the vocal performance so well, which can't be easy when every character has to be, you know, a car. Anyway, he's both the judge and the local doctor, again painting a good picture of how small and isolated this town is, and on noticing Lightning's race car characteristics, immediately wants him gone. We love an unbiased judge.
Holy Portia.
But then we're introduced to Sally, and yes, we have the uncomfortable objectifying Sally bit now.
All you have to do now is stand there and let me look at you.
Another quick reminder of who the co-director is, though ultimately he gets his just desserts as then she convinces Doc to put Lightning on community service to repave the road.
Nice ruling.
Because that's what you get from harassment, folks. Though, like every movie, they do end up together in the end. I'm glad we eventually learned that not every female lead has to hook up with the male one by the end. But first, Lightning gets hooked up with Bessie. It's kind of interesting which vehicles are anthropomorphized and which aren't. For her sake, oh, Bessie's not alive anyway. With the Lightning escape attempt, the incredibly put together vast landscapes do make me think that executed another way, this would have been a solid horror movie premise. Imagine if it was humans and this guy got abducted by an isolated town, dragging this road paving machine by hand, and the locals know exactly when you'll run out of steam on an escape attempt. Horrifying. Back to the road paving, and I, to this day, have no idea what Mater's saying.
You should have heard me on Giddy Up, Ooh, Papa Mile Mile.
If you just told me Larry the Cable Guy was just left to talk in the sound booth for this, I'd believe you. Also, why would he has his name listed like that in his credits? Like he's Lady Gaga or something. Fair game. To be fair, what's equally funny is people reacting to Ariana Grande using her real name in the Wicked credits, as if a new Pope's been announced. Anyway, back to the talking cars, we get clued into just how quiet things have been for this town.
Customers! Customers, everyone! Customers!
I think this scene's a particularly strong one too. I think a lot of us have been somewhere where the shopkeepers all step out and try to win you over. And I can absolutely imagine the real town along Route 66 being like this. I hope they did get a boost in tourism after this movie. It's not like they're hassling the couple in an unpleasant, greedy way either. You can tell they are genuinely proud of their business and don't often get an opportunity to get people in. However, that doesn't mean we can't relate to the couple as well. And that dynamic of the self-assured husband being too stubborn to ask for any help or directions, with the wife being receptive to listen, is, though maybe a tad stereotypical, you know, we've all seen that couple, haven't we? Despite Lightning ultimately screaming in their faces and them swiftly driving off, Sally's attempt at keeping things optimistic is a small moment but says a lot about her character and clinging onto hope from very little of it.
They're gonna tell their friends. You'll see.
Overhearing on the radio that Chick's arrived in California, we do have another daydream moment, this time with Chick having a Dynaco glory. The twins pop up again as the weird side piece in this fantasy. Man, the way they use them in this movie just keeps getting worse. We're not even on the bit where this daydream becomes real, and they do actually have so little agency that they switch over to being fans of Chick. Like, what happened? Lightning vanished for days and that was enough for them? Wouldn't they care more considering he's missing? Did Chick, like, do anything with them over those few days? Why are they always fantasized as a package deal as well? Aren't they like sister? I find this whole premise in the movie weird. Anyway, parking that, no pun intended, this vision sends Lightning into a panic, proceeding to rush through the job, which goes about as well as you'd expect.
It looks awful.
Well, it matches the rest of the town.
Yep, that character growth is still yet to kick in.
If I win, you do the road my way.
I like that Doc challenging Lightning to a race doesn't ultimately hint anything that we learn later about his past, whilst also making sense on retrospect. It's a clue you don't really realize is a clue, if that makes sense. It's good writing, you know? You don't really overthink at the time how Doc knew Lightning would crash, but absolutely makes sense on the rewatch. So yeah, he crashes and he's back on with Bessie. However, then seeing the first part of the road finished the next morning, I appreciate that there's also an element of consistency for Lightning's character. He's an arrogant, self-absorbed guy, but like any high-performing sports person would be, he's determined to reach his goal and not afraid to put the work in to achieve that. That's right, he's driven. You're welcome. Which is only further apparent by him going back to the dirt track to try and correct his mistake. This scene's consistent with the playbook of the sports movie genre, which weirdly Pixar would repeat in Inside Out 2. Wonder what the emotions in the Cars universe looks like. Hey there, you've made it halfway through this video. Come and subscribe if you want to keep up with other amazing movie deep dives. Give us some suggestions for the new year. And let's get back to the second half of Disney Pixar's Amazing Cars. The determined protagonist goes to the track or pitch to get in early morning practice before an older mentor figure interrupts them. Except instead of an older hockey player who was definitely a love interest in an earlier draft of the movie, it's a car voiced by Paul Newman. Pixar, they certainly have some creative prompts. It's here we get our first indicator. Can I claim indicator as a pun? It's here we get our first indicator that Doc does know more than he's letting on, only for Lightning to once again refuse to be seen taking advice from another person. Only for him to then immediately try it, and big surprise, doesn't go to plan. Back with Bessie, we see the townsfolk becoming warmer with the moody race car after being visibly pleased with the new road. With a brief cameo from the law enforcement's approach to peaceful protesters. This includes the classic awkward back and forth between romantic leads, building up to...
You're in love with Miss Sally.
Okay,
I know he's actually fixed a bit of the road now, but we've leapt considerably from their last scene together.
It looks awful.
To...
I'd let you stay with me. Oh, not with me.
We won't get into certain logistical questions posed by those undertones. There's plenty of Cars logic videos out there. I'm sure there's several talking about that too. Regardless, Lightning has another moment of...
Let me look at you.
checking out the equivalent of a tattoo sticking out the top of a woman's jeans, like any classic road worker would do. Similarly, don't take this romantic advice either.
You know, I used to crash into her just so I could spoke to her.
Yeesh. How about we move over to a 5-minute fart joke sequence instead? Yeah, that sounds better. Again, not my kind of humor personally, but it does function in building Lightning and Mater's chemistry. Admittedly, I do also think the incorporation of tractors as cattles was a pretty inventive approach. Like, why exactly do cars need tractors as livestock? Don't worry about it. Let them drink their tractor milk in peace. Personally, I wouldn't put my new friend's life at risk, and laughing whilst I was at it. That's absolute psychopath behavior, but hey, you do genuinely buy these two as buds by the end of the scene. Even if ultimately it's used to spell out the romantic
You're in love with Miss Sally.
plot. It does kind of work having Mater as that teasing friend on the school playground. They just want kids to relate to these characters. But for me, this does get a little bit...
You love her, you love her, you love her.
All right,
you love her.
okay.
You can't really even call this a will they, won't they at this point when you've got Larry the cable guy shouting, "They will!" before crashing into a tree. Inevitably, having overheard the whole ordeal, Sally goes in for another hesitant chemistry-building conversation.
Newly refurbished, right?
Yeah. Good night.
Next morning, another solid Sergeant Fillmore gag both confirms that Jimi Hendrix is in the Cars universe, but also once again leaves you wondering, how did Cars play guitar? Time for another nightmare, this time the Combine Harvester getting all the car kisses. To be fair, I did find this one funny. Rule of 3, guys. I'm guessing they've made merch out of that alarm clock at some point. I mean, they've done at least 7 variants of every character seen on screen, so there might as well be room for an alarm clock. And then to the surgery where...
Hey, have you seen the sheriff?
Emotional damage.
Prostate exam joke. Honestly, probably the best use of the Cars logic to sneak in an adult joke. I think it's great, though the sheriff does seem weirdly enthusiastic.
Get a good peek, city boy.
Anyway, that leads us to the big reveal.
Oh my gosh. 3 piston cups.
This is the part of the movie I'm particularly here for. Try as they might to get through the romantic subplot with Sally, or his friendship with Mater, or just the slow town in general. But it's the begrudgingly growing chemistry between Lightning and Doc Hudson where this movie really sings. From resentment to discovering the reason for the resentment to the ultimate resolution for that resentment. And lest we forget the line that ultimately feeds into the climax.
All I see is a bunch of empty cups.
Although Lightning's begun to become warmer as a character, this line is what begins his journey towards reassessing his relationship with racing. To see this supposed legend neglect what Lightning sacrificed any scrap of life outside of racing for is something he can't even compute at this point. And yet the fact that he's kept them also hints towards Doc not quite being over his past as much as he tells himself otherwise. With not much spelled out, unlike the Sally plotline, there's so much going on in these scenes with these characters. On to Mater's best joke in the whole movie.
He won 3 piston cups.
He did what in his cup?
No notes. They made me laugh at his character, good job. I wouldn't be surprised if they called it the Piston Cup just for that moment, nor would I blame them. After everyone unknowingly hurting Doc's feelings, look at the poor guy's face, we get the scene where I do buy into the Sally relationship a little bit more.
Come on, let's take a drive.
A drive?
The thing about Cars that I think some people don't like is that for a movie that revolves around a car race, it's actually a pretty small scale and low-key movie. There's not a lot of Cars antics. A point that just makes me even more angry about Cars 2. It's not a rampantly paced adventure like Finding Nemo. There aren't high stakes like Monsters Inc. You spend most of the movie in one dull town where the protagonist's goal is to finish paving a road so we can get to a race in time. In that respect, I can see why a lot of people see that as a negative, myself included when I think about the movie as a whole, really. However, it's moments like the drive scene that make me appreciate the different tone we get from this movie. Through the visuals alone, we just have two characters enjoying each other's company whilst taking in the impeccably animated visuals. It's the scene that just showcases the pure joy of what can be done in animation. This was the first CG movie to be able to pull off landscapes that look this convincing. And sure, other movies can have that and keep a more engaging pace, but I can't admit that there is something to be enjoyed about the quieter moments here. Considering that this movie's qualities being naturally more appealing to a younger audience includes these moments is quite a brave thing to do. And in defense of the weird Cars universe, would anyone have given this a smaller scale story the same time of day if it had been done with human characters? Later in this scene, we learn of Sally's past being in the big city, which also gives us insight into Lightning not being as happy as he lets on.
It never felt happy.
Yeah. I mean...
Going back to that moment early doors of not being able to name any friends. From incredible views and redeeming this otherwise shoehorned romantic beat, we get the flashback montage to when Radiator Springs was a thriving town. Whilst I find the initial leading of the lyrics literally going,
Long ago, the world was different.
very subtle. I wonder what the message of this scene will be. I otherwise find the scene to be pretty effective, particularly returning to it knowing that this is based on a real town that experienced this. The idea that this community was pushed aside and largely forgotten. All too often we see people on a smaller scale sidelined by the demands of the masses. As the world gets bigger, the individual gets smaller, something that a celebrity like Lightning McQueen wouldn't initially relate to. And the best stories are the ones that highlight how every individual and community has a story that matters, something that the world could do with remembering once in a while. And writing a character that is so detached from that at first just to smash him into that reality is also just good storytelling. Anyway, as they get back, we get a reprise of the tractor cattle gag. And somehow thinking he can retrieve one of these tractors, Lightning comes across Doc in full racing gear. Another great scene, once again showcasing how good the animation around driving actually is. I guess when you're the leading studio in computer animation and you're basing an entire movie around cars, the driving's gotta look somewhat convincing. Whilst driving isn't really my thing, for the animators behind these sequences, it clearly is, as the joy of driving is very much celebrated here. The callback to turn right to go left is a particularly great shot. I mean, just look at that. They had to animate dust for this shot. Can't last forever though, as he realizes that Schmuck under arrest is nosing in on the action. Not getting the memo, Lightning stalks him back to his sorrow garage just in time for the tragic backstory.
Right.
Great, now I get to see a car on its lunch break reading a newspaper. Though I do appreciate the fact that the paper's called The Daily Exhaust. I could name a few newspapers that should rename themselves to that.
There was a lot left in me. I never got a chance to show 'em.
Oh, gotta give it to Paul Newman for getting genuine emotion into the voice of this talking car. You find yourself genuinely feeling sorry for this car, feeling like he was written off too early. For any of us who have older people in our lives who experience that same kind of feeling, I think this scene definitely hits that spot. It also makes sense that Doc then came into this community, a place for people who the world have written off, but they have each other. Hitting this point home, Doc then asks Lightning,
When is the last time you cared about something except yourself, Hot Rod?
this is arguably the most important point for Lightning's character in this whole movie. Everything else, whether the scene in this room earlier or his drive with Sally, are also contributors to the cracks, but this is the moment that all comes together and his worldview ultimately shatters. From the beginning, we've known Lightning's key demons are self-absorption and loneliness, and this scene forces him to face exactly why that is. The reward of the subsequent scene wouldn't have been as great as it is if we didn't first have this point fully punctuated first. The same goes for Doc's subsequent actions, still clearly resentful of Lightning and what he represents. On to the next day, we get the predictable but nice enough beat of Lightning's false exit, complete with comic relief character not realizing he's left after all, despite him stood right next to him. him.
What's wrong with Red?
He's just sad because you left.
I've seen a million versions of that, but whatever. I do then really enjoy Lightning's philanthropy spree of helping out all the local businesses.
Tires can get me all the way to California.
A rare example of a rich guy realizing he can help people, what do you know? It's just a nice feel-good scene and a rewarding turning point for the character, topped off with the Illumination scene. No, not that one. As well as the solid 1950s vibes, the neon colors reflecting off the various surfaces being incredibly pleasing to look at, this is the full coming together moment of the town accepting Lightning into their community. Quite a transition from arresting him and strapping him to a road paver. It's the completion of a character journey set up from the beginning, the self-proclaimed one-man show finding his community. There are some light gags here and there, but the main thing we see in this scene are the characters just enjoying the moment. If this was, we'd be roped into yet another dance sequence. But dare I say, there's genuine warmth to this scene. And sure, the bits with Lightning and Sally are nice here as well. Again, from establishing those small details showcasing her care for the town earlier on, we understand how much this will all mean to her. But it can't stay like this forever, of course. As with many things, the media come along to ruin the fun.
It's the ghost light!
Cool, that's the bonus short film on the DVD nicely set up. A small detail I like here is Sally's look of shock at Lightning's face on the trailer. It shows that she genuinely didn't realize how famous Lightning is, which also further cements her feelings for him are in no relation to that, if that wasn't clear already.
Thanks for the call. You called them?
Being ushered away, the reveal that Doc was the one that tipped the press suddenly puts him in the position that Lightning was just days earlier, the others turning away from him in disappointment.
Hey, Lightning, you ready?
It's finale time as we go back to how we met Lightning at the start, in his trailer, In the Dark. Initially repeating the motions of the opening, just through visuals we see how his priorities have changed. Even as Chick taunts him about the twins changing alliance, again creepy. Thanks John Lasseter once again, great. Lightning doesn't care anymore, he's a relationship guy now. As his daydreams initially distract him, it initially looks like the race doesn't even matter to him anymore. However, the crowd-pleasing finale beats begin as a familiar voice comes over the comms.
I don't think
I didn't come all this way to see you quit.
Yeah, we're now at the completion of Doc's Arc 2, the one who'd previously been all for the abandonment of the game. I gotta say, I can't think of many movies where the reluctant mentor figure only gets on this late in the game. Even in Cool Runnings, John Candy's on side before the halfway point. It's another sweet moment that solidifies the message you can go after your ambitions, but you're all the better for not abandoning your life outside of it in the process. When you prioritize both, one can even help the other. It's not that the races shouldn't matter anymore, it does, but it shouldn't be all that matters. And this scene, of course, is peppered with some great moments.
It's time.
With many a pleasing callbacks to go around, whether gags or what Lightning's learned from his friends. However, the thing that makes this scene is how it ends, as Chick shoves King into a wreckage.
I am not coming in behind you again, old man.
It's not sugarcoated either, it is a nasty looking crash. Honestly, when I was a kid, I'd get so annoyed that Lightning didn't cross first, then go back for the King. You know, kind of completely missing the whole point of the scene and the movie as a whole. It's hard to make the point that there's more to the game than just winning if the guy went for the win first before doing the thing. You know, we'd be kind of disingenuous that way. Obviously, that doesn't happen, stopping in front of the finish line, letting Chick fly past him. You really don't appreciate how well the sound captures the stadium atmosphere until this moment where it all falls into silence. Flashing back to when the same happened to Doc, Lightning's character journey is complete. It's an outcome that I think's genuinely surprising for first-time viewers, and as annoyed as I was as a kid, I think it's one of the movie's strongest moments. Lightning still gets the big celebratory ending, and he didn't need to win to get that. He's instead celebrated for an act of selflessness, which is a profound message to send to younger viewers. Clearly that message didn't get to me at the time, but what can you do? The crowd cheering, the pride in Doc's eyes, man, this movie does deserve more credit, doesn't it? The epilogue with Mater and the helicopters a fun enough ending for kids and all that. Kind of interesting they squeeze in that Lightning McQueen's no longer prejudiced towards rusty cars just before that as well, but this is the perfect ending for me. And though Cars 2 added quite a significant damage to the general representation of the Cars franchise, I mean, I think that's personally why I didn't return to the franchise for years, I think it's particularly easy easy, especially with the billion-dollar toy business attached to these movies, to take a cynical retrospective on how these movies were just made for toy sales. And it's certainly fair to make that argument for why 2 sequels were made, as well as all the satellite shorts and TV series that they keep fueling for this property's relevance. And I don't think I'm the only one that has that more pessimistic opinion, at least before coming back to this on rewatch. However, scene by scene, I can now kind of see it's pretty well executed all the way along the board, even if it might have, to me, some larger scale branding issues. But digging into it at least a little bit deeper, this is why, looking back on this latest rewatch, Disney Pixar's Cars is ultimately pretty amazing. I get why it doesn't have the same love as other bits of the catalog. Some of the jokes have admittedly not aged very well. The logic of this universe very existence is hard for some to get past, and Mater can indeed get annoying at times. However, in the initial golden age run from Toy Story to Toy Story 3, I think Cars is definitely worthy of its place in the story. It's not quite trying to tell a story with the same level of stakes or action as other Pixar fares, but it's clear it's still a Pixar classic with all of the filmmaking prowess seeded into every moment. And who'd have thought it would still be possible at a small, forgotten town on Route 66 with the whiny Owen Wilson car? Now that's certainly a surprise. On that note though, I shall finally end it off there. My name's been Daz. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this amazing episode. Do tell me your thoughts on Cars 1. What makes it so grand, or are you still a little bit hesitant? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below, and I shall see you in a little bit.